And they told, whoops, and they told us that they had pulled back from their support system, that they'd gotten so much advice and what felt like criticism from the people who really wanted to help. So they began to be more socially isolated. And they also said we just tried one thing after the next, after the next. We couldn't hold ourselves still. I like being on a hamster wheel. And then the saddest part, in a way, in the end, and I felt this myself too, when I was in those moments, was they said I lost confidence in myself and I lost confidence in my baby. And they told us that anyone who listened really helped. So we knew when we developed this program that we had to have a model that was there in the urgent concern, the reality of the moment when that dark cloud was over their head, but engaged in a way that built their parenting capacity. And so that was our original goal. So next slide. So let me tell you about the first two folks that we engaged with. The first person that called, this is really interesting, was a family physician. So you can imagine how many families he had helped through this very period of infant development that he's now calling about. And he's calling to ask for sleep tips. So back again, you can imagine how much he already knows about that. So luckily, I stayed present to him. I tried to stay grounded myself, even though I was having these thoughts. Oh my gosh, this is our first person who's called. He knows more than I about this. Is there anything I can help him with? Will our program be a success? Again, flooded in that moment, able to catch myself, hold myself, and just ask him, what has it been like with baby Grace since you brought her home? And he was very quiet. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I tried to stay still and present. This was on the phone. And he said, with really holding back tears, I could tell, he said, I don't love her. I don't love her. And I never thought I would feel that way. So that's what he needed to share. He really needed to have a soft landing. He needed to be heard and to have his feelings held. And it wasn't a long call, interestingly enough. It was just enough. And you could feel him lighten a little bit as I listened and validated. Of course, it was nothing like you expected. You could feel him lighten a little bit. And then he chuckled a little bit. And he said, at least her mother likes her. And he was ready then to move on. So you think, okay, we've got this figured out. Families need emotional support. So the next person who comes is a young mom, and she's been going from emergency room to emergency room, trying to get someone to listen to her. She thinks there's something wrong with her baby. Every time she goes, baby checks out, baby checks out. So what's the message she's internalizing? It must be me. But she's determined. So she is referred by her pediatrician to us, Fussy Baby Program. My colleague, Larry Gray, who's a wonderful partner in this work, and I went to visit her. She did not want our emotional support. Empathy was not where she was. If you define it as empathic listening, she wanted us to look at this baby with her. She needed Larry to point to those baby's jittery legs and say to her, is that what you're concerned about? She needed to have her thinking heard. She needed to be respected. She said, yes, that's exactly what I'm concerned about. And then he asked her what she thought it meant to him, what her concern was. He listened carefully. Together, we asked her, we offered a little bit of developmental information with her and said, does that make sense to you? She said it did. And she was, I think, felt seen and felt heard because she felt respected. So how do you know what somebody needs from you? That became our question. And how can you stay calm in the face of these intense situations? I had a mom who I knew actually, and she called and we were talking, and she said her baby was an alien. So that was a moment, for me, mindful self-regulation, but my infant mental health mind was starting to whirl there, thinking of possible scenarios, but I didn't jump too fast. And I said, can you tell me more about that? And she said, with joy, we've never had a red-haired baby in the family before. I don't know where she came from, but she's adorable. Very different than I thought it might go. So again, how do you hold yourself so you can be present to the other. We also had a mother call and said her baby was evil. And that was a whole other path that we need to hear and hold. So next slide. A little quote by Winnicott down at the bottom. Winnicott says that you need to be grounded in order to respond to need. How to respond to need instead of react to need. So again, we knew we needed a model that held us so we could stay grounded in these tense situations and then figure out what was really needed. Next slide now. Back to infant crying for a moment. I'm working my way up to the fan here. So many of you may have seen this already. It's a crying curve that's been, in the literature for a long time. Babies come in kind of under the radar. I didn't, and some babies don't. And then their crying peaks at about 6 weeks. And then typically it comes down after that. Next slide. But here's the true story. This is what makes up that smooth curve. And what we knew is we had to find out who was this baby and start as if we had no idea. And it was a joint discovery. And interestingly enough, next slide, it's the meaning of the crying to the parent that really makes the difference. That's the real story. And we did research, Steve Porges and our team did research with fathers and with mothers. And we looked at the amount, kind of the objective amount of crying that the baby did. But then we asked this question, is your baby's crying a worry or concern for you? And if they said yes to that, regardless of how much the baby cried, they were at greater risk. And next slide, or I think there's some text there. They were at greater risk for symptoms of depression, anxiety, and low parenting confidence. And we did this with fathers and with mothers. So next slide. It really is, as we know in infant mental health and mental health, it's about inner experience. Again, that representational model, bringing our past history to it. Who is this baby to this parent? And what does this mean? Some parents can handle lots of crying. It doesn't evoke the same thing. They just might have needed some specific tips. Other parents, it's the hardest thing they have ever encountered, even though we might look at that baby and see a different baby. So next slide. So what did we learn from fussy babies and their parents? We learned we had to stay longer in those hard places. As I mentioned, when the parent says the baby's evil. Can you tell me more about that? And understand, this was actually a foster mom who wanted to adopt this baby. She had many babies in her care, but this baby had taken her heart. But she was frightened of this baby, interestingly enough. And can you tell me more about that? What is it that makes you feel that your baby, that brings that feeling up for you about baby being evil? And she said, it's the way he looks at me. Can you tell me more about that? It's his eyes. What eyes? What are you experiencing? And then she says, I know something I should know. And that is that she knew that the biological parent had schizophrenia. And this is her worry with her baby's sleep issues and the way the baby looks at her, and the baby's disorganization was evoking that in her. So we had to go to those hard places with the families, and we had to see the baby through their eyes first. We had another mom call, baby was 4 weeks old, and she was worried that her baby had autism. Now we know that autism is a fully human way to be in the world, that it's not possible to know at this point, but that's not where she was. She was really, really scared. And so you say, what is it that your baby's doing that makes you feel she might have autism? She begins to describe what she's seeing, and she begins to feel heard and begins to share more where that worry really was coming from for her. And we learned too that we had to find parents find their own way. I can remember on an early visit thinking I'd worked magic when I was there, and it was summer day, their windows were up. I walked out to my car and I heard that baby crying like crazy. I thought, oh my gosh, it's what they can do in the house, what they can do, not what I can do. Eric Erickson says you have to parent with somatic conviction. You have to believe in your body that this is the right thing for your baby and that you can do it. So how do we work with parents to help them find that strategy and then support them as they try it? And again, the work is complicated, it's evocative, it's infant mental health work. So we needed a model, again, that held us as well as a parent. So next slide. So it all became about attunement. We thought what parents really needed from us was to feel understood, to feel known, and to feel connected. And that feeling, when someone feels truly understood and known, the attunement that occurs creates a space where it's possible to see something in a new way. It's possible to interact differently. It's possible to learn something. So it's all about that sense of connection. Next slide. So how do you form that connection? A piece of it, this comes from Dan Stern, a piece of it is being present and being with a parent or another to share in their experience with no attempt to change what that person is doing or believing in the moment, to really hear it, for them to really feel felt, if you will, and to experience that kind of acceptance, if you will. A strategy that it often is hard to reach for because we have so many other things we want on our mind. We have tasks to do. We have, we have our own agenda that comes up. But these precious moments, Bruce Perry talks about being present. Healing, he says, occurs in these moments with a compassionate, regulated other. These small, repeated moments with a compassionate, regulated other. How can you be that in the midst of somebody's storm, if you will? That was our goal. So take a minute and just think about what attunement looks like to you. Think about an experience where someone really, really was present fully, and just bring that to mind. And just invite anyone who'd like to put how that felt in the chat box. I'll share kind of unusual, what might not come to mind, felt seen and heard. Thank you, Rebecca. Safe, Andy says. Warm, loved. Being understood is similar to being loved. Validated, understood, felt whole, and felt validated. That's wonderful. Relief, absolutely. And it was invigorating. There's relief, and it released capacity. Really, that's just what we hoped for, and felt seen and heard. Excellent. And stronger. That's wonderful. Supported. All of these things. This is what we want for relief and calm, like a storm passing. That's so true. And I'll just share a fun one that I appreciated. Happened to me not too long ago. I had to speak to an advisory board. It felt like a very high stakes talk for me. And my office was kind of a mess. My husband was, around the circle of all of this happening. And I came in that morning to get on my Zoom, and my desk was completely cleaned off. There was a rose from the garden there, and there was a glass of water. And I felt completely seen and completely heard and at peace. Thank you, Patricia. Yeah. Yes. So attunement can look in different kinds of ways. We want to be open to it, and it can feel differently. What looks like attunement to me might not feel like that to another. So next slide. Oh, so we're going to see if we're going to give these a roll. And this is to just get that embodied experience. You already know because of what you put it in the chat box, but take a minute now to let yourself feel what it is like not to be seen and not to be heard, even from someone who wants to do that, wants to help. So let's watch this from inside outside. Here's joy and sadness, and let yourself feel.
Oh, sadness. I have a super important job just for you.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Follow me.
What are you doing?
And there. Perfect. This is the circle of sadness. Your job is to make sure that all the sadness stays inside of it.
So, you want me to just stand here?
Hey, it's not my place to tell you how to do your job. Just make sure that all the sadness stays in the circle.
See? You're a pro at this.
Isn't this fun?
No.
Okay. And just invite you in the chat box too, again, to remember that what is it like when the mismatch happens? Again, these are often in helping relationships, caring relationships. Just invite that. What does that feel like? Unsafe, Victoria says. Stifling, dismissive, and condescending. Almost feels like being a burden to the other person. Lonely, angry, frustrating, amplifies disconnection, and affirms distress. Interesting. Yeah, you feel rejected and frustrated. All of those things, absolutely unheard, lost. You lose your own grounding. Less likely to seek help next time. Exactly, and exhausted. Affirms isolation. All of these things, all of it happens, and it happens even in our most caring relationships when we miss the boat. And we really believe that these moments are also precious moments in relationships, that repair is possible, and that relationships can be strengthened by that. That's a quote from Dr. Barry Razzleton, who I had the privilege of working with for many years, who's passed away now, but he believed that so strongly. And we do too. And we think the fan helps you in a very concrete way. Spot the matches when things are going well. It helps you spot the mismatches, and it helps you make the repairs. So next, we can skip the next video, I think, and we'll just go. So I want to ask you to just take a moment and to think, if you have a pencil and paper, you could jot this down, or just think to yourself, think of a relationship where there is a bit of a struggle for you now, not a huge, not the hardest one, but a relationship where there's a bit of a struggle, and picture a recent interaction there where it didn't go so well. And just note how you felt in that moment and what you did. So I'll give you just a couple of seconds to bring that to mind. And we're going to let you experience the fan in that, look at that interaction through a fan lens in a few moments. Okie doke. We've been doing a lot of painting and recarpeting, and for my husband, it feels like chaos to him, and for me, not a problem, and so there've been so many opportunities for mismatch, in these bringing these differences there, but the fan can actually help. It helps me, be able to acknowledge the chaos that he feels and stay grounded myself. So next slide, we're going to have a chance to, again, as I said, play with this. So there it is, the fan. This is this grounding framework that develops from our work with parents, and it's used in a lot of different settings now, but this is kind of our classic fan. The fussy baby one in the middle was the parent's concern. And we used to say parents' urgent concern in fussy baby work, because that's what it was. It's used more generally in home visiting, so we think about now as a concern. And around it are these 5 wedges of the fan. And the one on the left, the farthest one, the calming wedge, is our wedge. Remember, we said we needed a model that helped ground us. So this is a model of attunement to self and attunement to other. So we call it calming. And the strategy that goes along with that is mindful self-regulation, which we'll talk about in more detail in a moment. But this is where at any point in the moment in an interaction, we can check in with ourselves. We can try and understand what's happening for us, try and name it, try and check for biases that we might be bringing in this interaction, and try to select some strategies to help us stay regulated, and then so we can be present. And this, sometimes you're in mindful self-regulation, a lot of times in a context. Sometimes it flows and you don't need it that much, but it's always available to you. And then the other 4 wedges are where that other person might be. Again, just thinking really simply, are they in feelings? Then you can offer empathic support. You can validate, you can hold, you can explore feelings, and you can bridge from feelings. Or, are they in thinking, where their affect is more contained? It's not that it's not present, because feelings are always a part of life, but it's not primary. And this is when somebody wants to understand something with you, sort out an issue. This is the thinking, analyzing wedge. If you're thinking if you're working out a plan with a parent, let's say if back in the we're working out a sleep plan and all of a sudden you realize the parent's getting more anxious or they're glazed over, they're not with you anymore, then you realize that's not the fit now. You might drop back to mindful self-regulation. You might need a moment to reset yourself. We think, what is happening here? And they may have well gone to the feeling wedge. So you might just acknowledge it. Oh, it has been frustrating, isn't it, so far that nothing's helped? Might be something you'd offer. And the parent might say, yeah, it's really been tough, but I got to figure this out. So, stay in, you dropped into feelings, but you need to go back to exploring and they're headed towards doing. This parent. Another parent might just, begin to cry. I don't think this is ever going to work out. Nothing's helped so far. I never should have had this baby. And a lot has come up. So now you're in the feeling wedge. And that's probably where you're going to stay for quite a while. So again, I'm going to explain it to you. It's like it's feeling, thinking, doing, reflecting, but it's really not. It's really trying to understand where that other person is, trying to figure out what they need from you, taking your best guess, offering it, and then watching their response. That's the attunement process. So then the other wedge here, another wedge is the doing wedge. And this is when people are ready to learn something. And when they're Gil's going to keep track of all our questions, and Diane, happy to address. So that's when people are ready to learn something or do something. And the thing is, we're often ready before they are for that to happen. We were working with a child welfare worker, she's working with families with medically fragile babies. And she said, I go from door to doing. I knock on the door and then I go in and I just start giving them information. And she said, I think I might be missing a whole area. She said, I think I might be missing this whole area of feeling. And so she was able to begin to adapt her approach a little bit more. So then there's a reflecting wedge is the last one. And that's where we're really trying to encourage reflective functioning, really trying to capture those insights that parents have and help them build on them. Remember, parenting is non-conscious most of the time. People aren't aware of all the things that are happening for them. But when that insight bubbles up, I had a mom say to me, I get it. She said, my baby doesn't like to be touched and I don't either. It was a huge insight for her to acknowledge that and stay with it and help her, go deeper with it and help her hold on to that key that she had discovered. So that's the basic model. We hope it increases parents' confidence, strengthens relationships, and promotes development. Next slide. So I have adapted this fan in a lot of ways I'll talk about more later. We have a supervisor fan, which uses this very same concept of attunement, of understanding where the other person is, and then moving flexibly with them. In the supervisor fan, you're holding the supervisee's concern, your concern, and also the program expectations. So it's a little bit different kind of framework that you're holding. Next slide. We also have a consultant fan, same concepts, and you're holding that program's expectations, and you're holding the program state of equilibrium. As we know, programs go through phases themselves, and you have to, as a consultant, understand what the scene is, what's the system that you're entering as part of your process. I'll come back to those later. Next slide. So just a couple of words, and I'll fly through these to give you a real life example. Calming wedge, I've mentioned it before. Next slide. And this is a quote from Dre Paul. It's just not possible to work on behalf of human beings to help them without having powerful feelings aroused in ourselves. We're part of the relationship. It should be, that we should be impacting each other. Next slide. But mindful self-regulation has two parts: the in the moment self-awareness and rebalancing, and then stepping back later, we call compassionate critical reflection. What was happening for me and why do I continue to feel this way when I'm working, let's say, with dads? This deeper dive into what this is really meaning for you. So our theme about mindful self-regulation is what is happening for me in understanding. Next slide. And we view this dysregulation as an opportunity and as a cue. reading our own cues, it's not that something went wrong. It's that something is happening. This is what's happening. And we can catch it and we can understand it and work with our own regulation and use it to, I think, deepen our effectiveness. Next slide. So we talk about the ABCs of mindful self-regulation. That first A is, how am I reacting right now? Becoming aware of our own reactions, our thoughts, our feelings, our body tensions. How our body is the direct route to how our mental state is. So being able to read our own cues for dysregulation and asking yourself, now, do I know what's activating me? Sometimes I do know, sometimes I don't. And how are my reactions pulling me to relate? Are these processes, and are any of my biases or judgments affecting me now? And if possible, what meaning am I making of this? It's a lot to try and do in the moment. And then acknowledge and accept what you can see in the moment. And then having strategies that you can select that help you. And so that you can come back to balance, and so that you can stay in that connection with a new awareness of what's happening for yourself and the other, and any attending to any kind of relational repair that you might need. So next slide. The most common ones we've seen that people use, and you use these, you've already got these strategies, are breathing, grounding, self-talk in yoga class, and it's so helpful. It is helpful, but mindful self-regulation is in part something you can do right now. Next slide. So this stepping back for critical and compassionate self-reflection also is a deeper process of really looking at our beliefs, assumptions, and bias, and it goes beyond understanding, but also recommitting and questioning the meaning we are assigning to certain things. I had a chance where I was visiting a home and I hadn't been there before. And when I came in, there was a very strong odor, and there were a lot of diapers around that hadn't been put away. And it was an instant moment of dysregulation for me. And I needed that in the moment strategy so that I could be present and engage and work together with this parent. But then I also needed to step back and think, how did that affect my view of this parent? What judgments am I making about them? Is this something that's come up for me before? And are the next slide? And are there any, any biases or impressions that are affecting me in general? And how might our difference there in power and social location affect what it was like for them to be with me when I came in? What do I need to do differently to respect this person's goals and preferred ways of interacting? And what specifics can support our connection and collaboration? So again, in the moment, and then the step back part. Next slide. So the feeling wedge, and I won't spend much time here because this is your expertise. You know this so well. Next slide. Next, if you click it again, I think there's more text that will come up. Yeah. So the feelings, empathic inquiry. And next slide, there are 3 more that'll come up. And 1 more. Thank you. So you can hold feelings. I think this is really underrated. It's really just being present. It's listening, that being without needing to change anything. It's listening with acceptance, letting the story be told. And often not saying much yourself, much more nonverbal. Leading in, showing interest, maybe touching your heart if something is very moving that they've just shared, but really creating that true holding space. You can, as you know, validate feelings, and that helps acknowledge another person's felt reality. You try the best you can to come as close as what will be touching to them. And we say be lean of speech in these moments. You might just say, that sounds so rough, or what a surprise that must have been. And then that precious pause. And just let your acknowledgement sink in. It's like picturing a drop of food coloring into a glass. Let it be absorbed. Um, and then you can explore feelings. Again, as you know, it's really inviting someone to share more. We've learned a great phrase that helps us is what was that like for you? You're not asking directly about feelings, you can, but you can ask more in this way too. Or can you tell me more about what that felt like for you if you want to use the feeling words? Um, so all of this can be really helpful in these moments. And next slide. And it's also possible to bridge from feelings. And as you know, you may have held feelings, you validated them. You may need to stay there a long time, you may not. You may see feelings lessening a little bit. You may see someone kind of stuck in their feelings and feels like it's there's not a lot of affect with the story anymore. Um, and you might just see if you can bridge. And we say bridging, you keep one foot in feelings and then one foot you can think in thinking. You can bridge to doing too. But you might say, I hear how concerned you are. Um, what would you think about looking at him together? Would you be open to do an ASQ again? So that's an example that's going to come up later, but an invitation to think. I know how you want this to change. Do you feel ready to think about some steps you'd like to take? Is another example, and people will show you. They can go there with you, or they can't, and then you know how to make that judgment call. Or they go there with you, and all of a sudden it's not working, so you can drop back. The next slide. So this is the next one is the thinking wedge. And this one I think should be bigger for all of us. I think this is the underused wedge. And next slide, this is the pause before doing. This is when you really believe in the experiences that that other person has inside of them. And and you may believe more in that than they do at certain points. And you're open, you're curious, you're entering it with not knowing, but really wondering together, thinking together without the pressure in that moment to change something or to have them do it your way. You're free. It's really, truly exploration. And what we find in our research is that folks say that this is the wedge that reduces their stress. That giving up that control of having to fix it in that moment is really a relief. And being able to stay longer, you get closer to a real solution. We train physicians in this model, and collaborative exploration is key for them. And one of the outcomes is they feel they get to the real concern quicker, and they collaborate to solve it. And it's this wedge that allows them to do that. Next slide. So we're trying to take all of us off the fix-it train, those urges that come up. Next slide. And then to really stay with that other person's experience. These are sample questions. You've got many that you use. What do you think might be causing this? One of the time we used to use and still do use this question, what's your hunch? What do you think's going on? What does your heart tell you? Really starting with that person's theory. Most of the time people have some idea. They might say, I don't know, but, and then you explore that. And we asking, what have you tried? What have you tried? Has anything worked even a little bit? And what doesn't work? So important to understand before coming up with any solutions together. Is this something you'd like to work on? What would you like to see change? What do other people who are important to you think about this? How ready do you feel to start? Or is it just helpful to talk about it? We were very cautious about goal setting in our work with fussy babies and their parents because they couldn't follow through. And so we wanted to be judicious about that and see if they really did need to take that step. And then, what might be a small step? And then the big question is, what would it be like for you to try this new way? So that's the judging the readiness again. Next slide. The doing wedge. So this is so important because we have expertise and people want our expertise. They need it. Next slide. So it works best with an invitation. When people asking, and it's worse when the parent's ready to learn something or do something, and it works when they can focus. And when they can if you're working around the child, when they can actually focus on the child. And it also is important when the child needs the parent to act. We call that a capacity building moment where you intervene in a supportive way without taking over. Next slide. So there are lots of things that we do in the capacity building wedge, but I'll just highlight one and we'll see it in the example I'm going to give. Next slide. It's called how to share information. We call it offer a drop and explore. You've got people's perfect attention for about 20 seconds, maybe 40, 60, other things are starting to happen for them. So we learned how to give it, next slide, information in just a really titrated way. Dad's been texting the whole time during a visit, but he's listening. He looks up and says, "What's temperament? I've never heard of that." So you've got this precious window. Here's a drop. Babies have personalities right from the start. And here's explore. What have you noticed about your little girl? Response, she's pretty quiet, nothing like my other kids. You are into a conversation now. And you might offer many other drops. But this idea of information sharing as dialogue is really, I think, is so helpful. Because people live in a spin cycle. It's hard for them to hold on. And this can help. Next slide. And then the reflecting wedge. Next slide, I've mentioned it. It's really holding on to insights in the moment, building their capacity, and understanding meaning behind behavior. So let me just invite any comments in the chat box, just from what I've said so far. What's standing out for you all? Ongoing curiosity. Absolutely. In collaboration. We'll talk about that in a moment. Yeah. In a way, it is neurosequential, isn't it? Calm, regulate before moving to higher level thinking. There's a flow through each wedge and mindful of it. Yes, they go back and forth. Relationships are important. Exactly. And we say the fan is a model for relationship building and reflective practice. Thinking and doing. That's right. Those are the two that we often get the most questions about. And we just kind of define it arbitrarily. We say that the thinking together is anything that's analyzing or coming up with a plan. And they're not always happening at the same time in the same moment. That's right. The third eye, intentionality. That's what we hear from folks, that the fan helps them be more intentional, more attuned. Yes, and we're working with floor time to embed the fan into floor time. Getting out of that fix-it rut. Great. Absolutely. We are helpers. It's in our DNA. And how to be most effective. That's what we hope this helps with. Great. Thank you. Perfect. Next slide. Feel free to keep adding any insights as we go. So I'm just going to talk about the arc of engagement for a moment. And in addition to the interactive process of the fan, there's this structure that can go around your engagement. We call it the arc. Next slide. And it starts with you and it ends with you. So before this contact, before your phone call, before your Zoom call, before your home visit, you ask these questions, how am I? Oops, that's my phone. How am I? Literally, how am I? And what do I need to do to be fully present? And who are we to each other? Thinking back again about how you might be seen. So I look like an elder person. I have white hair. How is a young parent going to see me? And how do I see them? Are questions we might ask ourselves. Again, thinking about social identity, power, and relationship. So then early on in the contact, we love this for you question. And it can look a lot of different ways. Here it says, what's it been like for you to take care of your child, since we saw each other last? With our physicians, they say, what's it been like for you, since you got this RSV diagnosis? They put the issue in with it, but they're just trying to understand the experience of the other person early on. Somewhere in the middle, I want to check in with you. Are we getting to what's most on your mind today? Again, this is a way to collaborate and share power throughout your interaction. At the end, with parents who often ask them to describe their baby in 3 words, we'll say, if you could send a text, to your mom and tell them, how Devante was today, what would you say? So again, helping them reflect on the child and then on what their experience was with you. I'm wondering if there is something that you would like to remember from our time together today that will be helpful for you. Our physicians say, I'm wondering what was most important to you from our work together. Some other home visitors like to say, I'm wondering what stood out for you. These ARC questions need to be yours. They need to be your sound and feel like you, but holding on the purpose of the ARC, which, and then after the contact, asking yourself again, it's not over till we've checked back in. How am I now? What was it like to be in relationship with me today? And then what do I need to do to be present for what's next? Again, thinking about our own regulation and self-care. And if we add this before contact and after contact in throughout the day, in each of our interactions, I promise you, you'll be in a different place at the end of the day. It really helps to reset like this. Next slide. So the purpose is to provide security. It's consistent, it's predictable. People don't have to wonder about what's going to happen when you arrive. You know, they know you're going to ask, how has it been for you? Or however that phrase, that question has developed. One of our home visitors uses the phrase, hey, how's mom time been for you? Again, it has to be real and genuine, but the for you. People know what to expect. And it helps you take the pulse early on in our work with home visiting, that we saw a higher amount of time spent on parenting because they shifted that focus early on. It provides a concrete way to partner throughout the visit, and it gives closure, completing a communication circle. We say it's counterintuitive to slow down at the end instead of speed up at the end, but there's such value in it, even if it's just for a minute or two for reflection. And it allows you to check in with yourself, address your own needs, and become, again, aware of those biases and judgments that we might be bringing. Next slide. We have an ARC for supervisors, which is very similar. We added in finding the agenda part. You know, what would you like to focus on today? Here are some things we might talk about. Where should we start? Giving control back to the supervisee. At the end, we asked them, what would you like to remember from our time together today? And is there anything you would like me to remember, you know, for us? Next slide. We also, in this, you can click a bunch of buttons. We also have an ARC on the fly. There might be, because a lot of times you don't have an opportunity to sit down. We work in childcare settings, you know, and work with directors where people are always catching them in the hall. Physicians, they're getting caught in the hall. These brief conversations can still have a sense of containment, beginning with that idea, can I commit? Someone comes to your door, can I commit at this moment? Yes, asking yourself, then decide, yes, I can, and engage, or no, I can't. You know, and then you can absolutely, you can have copy of the PowerPoint slides, and decide, make that decision, and then try and listen to what, acknowledge it. Thank you for telling me. Of course, that's on your mind. Some acknowledgement early on, then assessing what you can offer in that moment, and then closing the circle. Thank you for telling me. You know, if you're going to meet them later, I'll see you at supervision. We'll take this up then, etc. Again, giving yourself predictability in these unpredictable times that we're in. Next slide. So FAN interactive processes ARC is the structure around it. Next slide. So I'm going to just walk you through an example. And again, this comes from a home visiting, and it's going to sound familiar to you at this point. Mom is at the door. She's very distraught. Home visitor opens the door, and mom says her baby has ADHD. She's really distressed. This is a 9-month-old baby. Next slide. So the home visitor has this moment of panic. Oh boy, she says, this must not be a good day for a visit. She wants to flee. But she uses her mindful self-regulation. She takes a deep breath, pause. Next slide. And she realizes, where is this mom? She's in feelings. Mom's actually walked away from her, walked across the room, and she says something like, it must be hard to be so worried about your baby. Trying to meet her there. Next slide. Back one here this minute. So she stays there in feelings with her a little bit, you know, acknowledges it, tries to explore it, but doesn't seem like that's where the mom is. And so she wonders if she can bridge a little bit. And she says, you've been really concerned about him. Would you like to take some time to think about him together? They actually are supposed to do an ASQ screening that day. Mom leans in. Yes, she wants to do this. Mom's got something she's trying to figure out. So next slide, they're asking the questions, the ASQ, and the home visitor finds herself thinking these thoughts. Did you see it? Are you getting this? I'm proving to you he doesn't have ADHD. Mindful self-regulation moment. She catches herself, realizing she's identifying with this child. She's trying to correct the mom. She uses her deep breath pause again. She uses self-talk. And she says, slow down, Tiffany, slow down. Mom's got to see it. Mom's got to see it. And then all this is happening while the screening is going on. Next slide. This internal process. Again, using the self-talk. Next slide. And they continue on. And then next slide. Mom moves it. Mom says, have you ever heard of a 9-year-old walking? This is when the parent's ready. This is the invitation to go there. And next slide, the home visitor says, drop and explore. Most babies walk around their first birthday, but some do walk earlier. And then she asks the question, have you ever heard of a 9-month-old walking? Next slide. Mom now moves from information seeking to really sharing her real worries. I'm really worried. She's talking about her neighborhood. Her brothers are starting to get in trouble. She lives in an unsafe neighborhood. This very active 9-month-old, she's really scared something is going to happen to him. So there we are in the feeling wedge. And this is close to the end of this visit. The home visitor is working hard to stay present, to listen compassionately. Next slide. But she's finding herself feeling overwhelmed and helpless and privileged at that point. Again, a moment for mindful self-regulation. Next slide. So here she's using breathing to regulate herself. She's trying to ground herself. Those feet on the floor feel stable, a stable presence. And she's thinking, I can't change her life in a way I can't make this neighborhood safe for her. But what I can do is I can validate her strength. Next slide. And so she goes to the doing wedge and she says, I know how much you care for your baby and how much you are doing for him. And mom's able to take this in. Again, as they wrap up, next slide, home visitor asks, if you could describe him in a couple of words today, what would you say? And mom says, he's all over the place and he's mine. And what she wants to remember is he can do a lot of things. So through this process, you can see, I'll invite into the chat box, what did you see through this process? Respect, empowerment, being with, it's not linear. It's the therapeutic alliance and trust building, right? Compassion for the worker and for the parent. Empathy, right, for both. Mutual empathy, really. Validation, yeah. And, I was just doing a training. Actually, we work with youth mentors and the support staff who support youth mentors. And one yesterday said, it puts dignity back in our relationship. And I thought was very touched by that. I do think it's a very respectful approach and it's the way people want to be. That's why people get into the helping profession. Yeah, next slide. Thank you for your comments. Please feel free to keep them coming. So it's, you do your best. You try to read those cues, you offer what you think will help, and then you ask yourself this very important question, is this working? And if it's not, then you try and shift and try again. It's this process of attunement. Next slide. It's about trying to be on the same page. It's not about getting them where I want them to be on the fan. One of our colleagues says it's about getting me to where they are and going from there. Next slide. It's messy. We know this from Edtronics research. About 30% of the time you get it right the first time. About 70% of the time you're working at it. And this is to be expected. This is what relationships are about. And we want to, we call it a 70-30 when people feel the mismatch, to normalize that and be able to work with it. Next slide. Again, I mentioned the quote from Dr. Brazelton that these mismatches can bring us closer. So I want to give you a chance now, next slide, to go back to that relationship that you thought of when we started and just take a few moments to think about that challenging interaction. And now with what you know about the fan so far, what you know already, again, remember, fan organizes what you know, doesn't bring new content necessarily. So just take a moment and ask and answer for yourself this beautiful fan question. What was it like for you to be with this person at that moment? What was it like for you in that challenging interaction? And where on the fan, from what you know, was the other person in that moment? And they can be in feeling, thinking, doing, or reflecting. They can't be in mindful self-regulation. That's our spot. And you probably weren't there either because of this, because of we're dissecting a mismatch now. So somewhere, okay. So where were they and where were you? I can't imagine what they were going through. If you were going to go back into that moment, they're frustrated, so they were in feelings, and become the attuner and work towards getting back on the same page. I was in feeling, they were in thinking. Thank you, Robert. A great example. The most common mismatch is one person is in doing and the other person is in feeling. That's the one we hear the most about. But if you were to go back into that and use this framework, what could you do to be more on the same page? And let me ask you, did anything shift for you as you thought this through using this framework? Any comments in the chat box are welcomed. Can you have a mismatch even if you're both in the same wedge? I think you can. For example, if two people, if I'm like the helper and they're in feelings and I'm like in my feelings and I'm in my feelings, like, here's an example. A young man told his helper, home visiting, that he wanted to learn to drive. And, he was excited about that. And the home visitor got so excited. He was just thrilled, that this guy wanted to learn how to drive and absolutely overwhelmed the youth who didn't show up for the next couple of visits. And then they were both in this intense state. And the home visitor realized he needed, he was dysregulated in that, and he needed to go to mindful self-regulation. So then he could think more carefully. And actually, the youth was very afraid of driving when they really got underneath it. Yeah. Okay, next slide. So this is fun. I just want to share with you. I do a social work seminar, and my students have come up with this fan reflective framework for their work with each other. What would you like to focus on today? How can we be most helpful to you? What was it like for you to be with this person or in this situation? That for you question. When did you feel most connected? Were there any mismatches? Were there any repairs? Who are you to each other? What parts of your identity were coming up in this interaction? Is there anything you do differently? Checking in, are we getting to what you most hoped we'd talk about? And what are your ideas for self-care in this situation? Which is an interesting addition to it. And also, what are you taking with you that will be helpful as you go forward? So the FAN is a model, is a framework for relationship building and reflective practice. So I just want to say a couple of words now about, next slide, about self-compassion. Again, when we look so closely at relationships, we see we see all the mismatches, what we might internalize as flaws in ourselves. We see the moments we did what we wished we wouldn't have done, the thing we said we wished we wouldn't have said, the thing we didn't say that we regret. And so sometimes I think for this attunement process, we need to repair with ourselves first. And that's where self-compassion comes in. Next slide. It's been said if your compassion doesn't include you, it's incomplete. Self-compassion is compassion directed inward. Being touched by our own suffering, generating desire to alleviate our own suffering and treat ourselves with understanding and kindness and concern, especially when we're feeling low, when we are not feeling great. Next slide. It's really a self-to-self relationship. And we want to change, if you will, the narrative of that self-to-self relationship in these moments. Next slide. Self-compassion is a practice of goodwill, not good feelings. Next slide. It's a practice of goodwill towards ourselves when we're having those not good feelings, when we realize we let somebody down, when we misspoke, etc. Next slide. You may have heard of this parable of the second arrow. The first arrow comes from the outside. Yes, I did do that. I did forget that most important call. That's the first arrow. But the second arrow comes from within. Why did you do that, Linda? You forgot again. You're not tracking time, and all these things. Maybe you shouldn't be doing this work anymore, etc. All those injuries that we self-injure ourselves. So that instead of a second arrow, we want self-compassion. Next slide. Because when we're harsh and criticize ourselves, we're activating our own threat system. We are both the attacker and the attacked. And physiologically, we are activating our threat system. Next slide. With self-compassion, we can activate our calming system. We can be the soother and the soothed in these moments. And it's not that we're trying to take away feelings, but we're trying to get ourselves to a place, again, where we can hold ourselves with kindness, and so that we can be more available and present in the way we want to be. Next slide. So you've probably heard of this, the different components: being gentle with ourselves, recognizing that everyone has these moments. We're part of the human circle, part of humankind, and that in these moments we want to not exaggerate them, we want not to ignore them, but to be able to hold ourselves in a particular way. Next slide. So just take a moment now and think of a moment where there was suffering, where you felt those not good feelings. Maybe in that interaction you're remembering before. And take a moment to acknowledge that suffering is a part of life and that you're not alone. And if we could see everybody on this screen, all 193 of you, every one of you have had these moments yourself. It's part of being human. And you're not alone. Everyone hurts sometimes, the song goes. And then think about how you can be kind to yourself in this moment. What can you say to yourself? What can you let yourself feel that is comforting, encouraging, and kind? So take a moment to experience that. So we can stop the screen share now. Lots of evaluations of the fan. They all seem to find across groups that people are more collaborative, they're more empathic, and they're more satisfied in their role. That it's interestingly, in our research with physicians, we found that their visits are more effective. They're shorter, not longer, which was a surprise finding, because they're really, as I said, getting to the real problem quicker. So the fan is used in home visiting, early intervention, infant mental health settings, center-based programs, child welfare, child advocacy centers, court teams. It's used in pediatric primary care. And why is it so helpful? And I think Kohut had the answer for us. He talks about accessing your vital self versus your fragmented self. And he talks about coherence and continuity and cohesiveness. Coherence, the fan lets you name things. That's right. He was in doing today. That's what was happening. In continuity, it helps you track things and knit these pieces together that can seem so confusing. Oh, first we were here and then we were here, but I missed the boat and now I got myself back on track. And you can actually see what happened. Um, and then cohesiveness. It helps, it calms and organizes you in relationship to the work, and it serves as an anchor. So, Gil, happy to talk with, answer questions, have dialogue. And happy to share the slides, and there are a couple more handouts. We'll make sure everybody gets available. Yeah.
Thank you, Linda. You know, it's so wonderful and such a gift to see these ideas and concepts and practices put together into a whole, because they're often, we know them, but they're in bits and pieces. So really a tremendous difference.
Yeah.
There certainly are a lot of positive affirmations. There are a few questions. One is, has the fan been used with children with reactive attachments?
You know, I don't know. Not there hasn't been a project that's done this. It's used in. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure if my internet was doing something. It's used in infant mental health settings. And so it's used by a lot of infant mental health therapists to kind of organize again their framework. So I don't know for sure exactly if children with reactive attachment disorder have used it, been used with it. But again, it's the framework. It organizes us, you know, and it's not model specific. So we have colleagues that in child parent psychotherapy that use the FAN as an organizing framework. You know, again, it's just a framework to hold yourself. It's separate from the intervention that you're providing. Does that make sense?
Another question was, could you reflect a little more on the value of repair?
The value of repair? Yes. I think it's invaluable. I mean, I've been married 44 years. I think that's why. I think it's just there in relationships. It's just a part of it. We don't acknowledge it. As professionals, we think we shouldn't have to. We think we've made a mistake, right? We think we've been unprofessional, as opposed to seeing it as a part of human relationships. You just can't get it right all the time. In fact, where there's hyper attunement, you know, there's not necessarily security. So Ed Tronick talks about this mismatch and repair as strengthening. It's this saying that the relationship's sturdy. You know, we can come through hard things together. And then maybe you have the safety to feel I could tell you something that's even harder. What's your thought on it, Gil? Anything that you want to add to that?
Well, I think it really is a big piece of our capacity to love, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is the ability to repair. I think you alluded to that when you talked about, you know, your own relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we should embrace it as a professional competency, if you will. You know, it's part of what we bring because it gives people new experience of relationships. And that's how healing occurs too. Most people haven't had a lot of experiences where somebody came back and said, I was thinking about you all week. You know, I think I really missed the boat last time we were together. Could we start again? You know, there's a healing quality to that of having new experiences.
Absolutely. And I think it helps us to live with our own unruly impulses that sometimes do damage, right? And we've got to repair it.
Yeah. And repair with ourselves. This idea of self-compassion is one way for repairing, and not just it with the other, but with ourselves.
Someone asks, I'm wondering how to help organize a mother's who has a history of severe trauma, reactivity, or personality problems, and they are projecting and seeing the professional as the bad object.
Yeah, I mean, I think that happens, right? That is part of the work, and to try and understand how you know what is underneath that, and how to not internalize it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's an important point, isn't it? How to hold it and contain it, but not internalize it and react to it.
Right. Yeah.
Very important therapeutic strategy.
Yeah. Because you don't want to collapse, right? You don't want to retaliate and you don't want to collapse. You want to be present so that people can experience their own humanness, with you. And supervision, right? This is where, not to do alone, but with that hand on your back.
A question, has the fan been utilized in group settings, such
Yeah.
as group supervision or team meetings?
Absolutely. And we're working with Mary Claire Heffron. We're developing and have developed a group fan. So, and it's used in group supervision and very helpful. We have a learning tool that goes with it, so you can kind of help analyze that group dynamic using the fan framework, as well as your own role as leader. So yes, it is really helpful. It's helpful in team meetings and in group supervision. Yeah. And yes, it's used in medical settings. We're working with, we're particularly focused on residency training programs. And what we've seen, we just published a paper in Teaching and Learning in Medicine, and the physicians reported more relational empathy, and they reported that they understood, they reported what we would hope for, that they were more collaborative and they understood people who were very different from them. They had a greater understanding. And again, their visits were more efficient and they felt more effective, that they would have missed things without the fan. Yeah.
Wonderful. Linda, I had an interesting experience. I was doing consulting actually for an agency in Chicago, and they were contemplating using the fan, and they reported to me that another colleague agency of theirs had taken the fan, and that they had noticed a significant reduction in missed appointments. And since they had the fan training, and a reduction in client-initiated terminations in treatment. So that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and you know what? Yes, that is remarkable. And I think it goes back to this, what our real hope is for respectful, collaborative relationships, that people want to come back to. Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. That's great.
And someone asked whether you had any articles that you would recommend about repair and related to the fan and related themes.
Yes, we have several articles on the fan, which I can share. We have one that's written on the fan as a framework for trauma-informed practice. We have a paper that just came out of the Infant Mental Health Journal on the actual fussy baby program, the intervention with parents. And there we saw that parents felt more self-efficacy, and that was what we were aiming for. They felt more confident in themselves as a parent. So I can make these available. Happy to.
We're just about out of time, but one last question, which I think is so pertinent to your professional career. Has the fan been used in medical settings? Oh,
yes. I was talking with residency training programs, and that it's been used in primary care. And also we're working in behavior and developmental pediatrics in another residency program there. And we also use it in our emergency department at the University of Chicago, which is very powerful. And we have the physicians put their mindful self-regulation strategy on the back of their name tag, their name badge. And it's amazing how one of these are fellows just held that, badge in a really tough moment, to remind herself and reconnect with herself. So yes, it's definitely used.
The fan as a transitional object and phenomenon.
Exactly, it is. You know what? We when we trained in person, and we have a full partnership with Nurse Family Partnership, and they've embedded it into their core training for new programs, and they are for all their programs, and they just are training all 500 of their supervisors in the supervisor fan.
Oh,
so
wonderful.
Yeah. The fan works when it meets a need. And for Nurse Family Partnership, the need was a model for reflective practice. So that, was a perfect fit for
Great.
them. Yeah, so we work with lots of different groups. Yeah.
Our time, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Last thing I just want to say is that what I've learned over all these years and seeing literally hundreds and hundreds of people from different disciplines embrace the fan is that there's such capacity in each person. It's like it releases it, and that people have this ability to be present to other people. And, and it's something that can grow. People ask, do you just have it or do you not have it?
Thank you, Linda.
You can grow. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a splendid presentation and so
Joy.
heartwarming as well as intellectually and clinically satisfying.
Yeah.
I just want to remind everyone to please complete the evaluation form. That's important to all of us, and it helps us out a great deal. Your thoughts and your evaluation is
Oh, that's wonderful. That's great. I put my email in the chat box and happy to talk with anybody about it and about our training approach. And thank you for this opportunity to be with you.
a pleasure.
Yeah. Also, I want to say we've had the joy of partnering with the New York Jewish Board over many years to bring the fan into their practice. And I just honor our relationship with them and all that they've done with it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.